Welcome back to the broadcast. This is Inside Politics here on KTN News. We are having some technical issues with our Zoom guests. We're trying to sort that out, but we continue with the show. For the Silly Secretary General, Njeru Kathangu, as well as other members of what was known as human rights activists, including Professor Ngodho Kariuki, have urged Kenyans to remain vigilant in defense of multi-party democracy and the expanded freedoms under the Constitution. Kathangu and Ngodho said July 7th should be commemorated annually as one of the historic days in Kenya's second liberation struggle. And as Kenya marked the 30th Saba Saba Day, police arrested 56 activists who were marching to protest police brutality during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown.
The annual Saba Saba March for Our Lives that was organized by social justice centers in various informal settlements in Nairobi was stopped by vigilant police officers who moved in to disperse the protesters.
I'm not going. Sorry. I'm not boarding. I refuse to bow.
The activists accused police of brutality during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown.
I protest because you're killing us.
Who's killing you?
You police. You're killing us in our communities. Poor communities.
56 activists were arrested and booked at various police stations in Nairobi.
I'm not afraid.
Hii Kenya bado haijapata ukombozi. Kama polisi wanaweza jaa Nairobi na tear gas na GSU wako hapa hadi Jivanji wanapiga watu, wameshika watu, illegal arrest, detention. So tuna condemn hii sana.
Njeru Kathangu and Professor Ngodho Kariuki, who were among the 5 original coordinators of the first Saba Saba rally in July 7th, 1990, said the day should be commemorated as one of the historic days in Kenya's liberation struggle. In July 7th, 1990, police clobbered and violently dispersed those who attempted to gather at Kamukunji grounds. 40 people were killed, 70 injured, and at least 5,000 arrested. Over 1,000 people were charged with looting and rioting. Some of the leading opposition politicians were arrested and detained.
4 days before, Matiba, Rubia, and Raila had been arrested. Then, when we went to Kamukunji, 4 days after, Bwana Kathangu, George Anyona, Professor Oyugi, and myself, Ngodho Kariuki, were arrested.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall, then everybody saw the need for Africa to continue liberating itself.
The clergy, civil society, and a section of foreign missions in Kenya were also on the front line championing for reforms and democracy.
December 31st, when Bishop Okulu and Reverend Timothy Njoya blessed it and announced in the New Year celebrations, in the eve and in the morning, that Kenya needs to change its attitude and let the people go. And again, the movement was given more energy.
On 16th November 1991, the original Ford made a second attempt to hold a rally at Kamukunji despite a government ban. One person was killed and opposition supporters dispersed. In December 1991, the constitution was amended and paved way for the 1992 multi-party elections.
It wasn't easy to call people at Kamukunji to say that we want to change.
Talks of a grand coalition government that has seen the opposition warm up to Jubilee is a great concern to the architects of Saba Saba.
Multipartyism is being almost negated now that people want to kill political parties to return to what was.
Interestingly, majority of those who fought for the second liberation have been kept on the sidelines and the Saba Saba dream lost. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
Hezbollah, let me come to you first, and I want us to get into parallels that can be drawn, if any, between the spirit of Saba Saba, which was celebrated this past week, and the current political climate against the backdrop of the BBI process and calls, for a constitutional referendum. First of all, what are your initial thoughts on what Saba Saba Day means today, what it has become today?
Well, I think going back to what we experienced as kids, seeing the young Turks fight for the second liberation, Saba Saba Asili, of course, pioneered by Charles Rubia and Kenneth Matiba, you can actually draw parallels. I mean, the Kenya that they were trying to fight for is more or less the same as the Kenya that the BBI is trying to, entrench. And you'd understand the disillusionment and the disenchantment, by most of the fighters who are not in the political class. Because what they are seeing is that they fought for a space. And in a sense, there is a way in which the space is occupied by the very people who they were fighting, or the very people who are perpetrating whatever they were fighting. And you listen to most of them, like, Dr. Willie Mutunga, Dr. Timothy Njoya. Those are the sentiments that come out. And we've had this conversation for the last 30 years. And it is interesting that BBI is coming at a time where people have a lot of information. It's a lot more easier to engage in a constructive and less militant way to provide that framework that will hopefully, and from where I sit, make us realize what the original Saba Saba was indeed all about. A Kenya that is a lot more inclusive, a Kenya that takes, the bulk of the people at the bottom of the pyramid out of poverty and bring food to as many families as possible to narrow that gap between the rich and the poor. A Kenya that would, take us from that imperial elite that has been operating on a winner takes it all to a situation where power is more or less given by the people who are governed. A Kenya where there is electoral justice. And I think if the BBI and everything that the BBI has articulated is anything to go by, it has been a lot more consultative, it has been a lot more consensus building. And what I expect is that when it comes back to Kenya, Kenyans are going to see it as something that they contributed to. And if it is not a reflection of what they want for this country, they'll still have a say. So from where I sit, BBI seems like a more democratic, more consensus-driven effort that includes a lot of Kenyans. And Kenyans need to be very careful not to allow it to be hijacked by politicians who are not addressing the very issues that the original powers that were behind the Saba Saba Asili were fighting for.
Let me bring in Mark Bichachi now for the first time. Hopefully we've sorted out the technical hitches that we've been having. Mark, the spirit of the Saba Saba was to make Kenya a free and just society. Some of the people who fought in that struggle said the gain they were looking for were not achieved at independence. Some of the pundits, they say, those gains were not achieved at independence, they were not achieved in 1990, 30 years ago, after Saba Saba, the first one, and they were not achieved after the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. Can they be achieved now with this BBI process?
Ben, thank you for the question and for inviting me to the show. Now, the truth of the matter is that any society has to be a progressive society. What that simply means is that the gains, especially down to the rights of a people, are usually gained slowly. There is no country in the world that can say that it has gained all the things they fought for, either at independence or at the promulgation of any constitution. That is why the BBI document is very important. The BBI document is a peacetime document. It's a document where a sitting leader has decided to correct certain ills in society. We've not seen anything like that. And that is something that we should celebrate, that during peace, without tear gas mandate, without police putting people in jail, we can actually agitate for the changes that we need, not just within the constitution, but it has opened up government policy, it has opened up the economy, it has opened up even the security apparatus around our borders. So the truth of the matter is, yes, we are getting closer to what we fought for in 30 years ago during Saba Saba. We're getting closer to what we fought for during independence. The only difference today is we have the freedom to make memes, insult, do whatever we want, and we forget to celebrate that those are changes that we can actually hold on to, and those changes will not be taken away. They can only be enhanced by the BBI.
What about those, Mark, who say that in fact we have regressed, we have lost gains that we had achieved? There are some people who have accused the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, of doing exactly what the founding father, his father Jomo Kenyatta, did, and that is, according to them, take care of a few elites at the expense of a lot of Kenyans. That is what some critics have accused the founding father of doing when he came into power in 1964 rather. That's what they accuse the BBI process of doing, of taking care of a few positions for a few elites at the expense of 47 million Kenyans.
Well, I say to those people that they have not read the document, because the BBI report that came out does not seem to be elite-centered. It does not even consolidate the prime minister position that they are talking about. And even if they did, it is not taking care of the elite, because the truth of the matter is that Kenya is such a vastly divided country that we do need to address the issue that in 1992, we had tribal clashes, and Raila and Uhuru and Ruto were not running for president. In 1997, Mwai Kibaki went to court saying that the elections had been stolen. In 2002, even though it was one of the most peaceful elections that we've had, we must be very clear how many people died at the hands of Mungiki in 2002, how many people died in Molo. So we do have a problem, and it needs to be addressed. Secondly, let's look at the freedoms those people have. The very fact, Ben, that we can say that people are saying that Uhuru Kenyatta is favoring the elite. Some have called him a dictator in national television, is testament that we are not where we used to be. I dare you to travel back to 1997 and try and say those words about the sitting president then. It would be impossible. So we do have gains, and we must learn in this country to appreciate where we are without trying to act as though we've not made any gains at all.
All right, Dismas Mark Bichachi talks about freedoms that Kenyans enjoy today. Back in 1990, I was in preschool, what we call nursery school, and I only read about it. And a lot of people were beaten trying to access Kamukunji grounds. Some people lost their lives. On Tuesday, when Kenyans were celebrating the 30th anniversary, some people were trying to protest about police brutality during this COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. And they were beaten and dispersed by police, tear gassed, 56 of them arrested.
Well, you know, when you look at our dynamics from 1990, the constitution we have today is a result of people-driven and people-centered democracy. When we got the constitution 2010, majority of people were not even very keen on that constitution because it was upsetting the status quo. Now, when you draw parallels to BBI, BBI is being driven by the ruling class and special interests. So you cannot say that a BBI is all-inclusive. Absolutely not. Because when a BBI has attempted to go countrywide and get views from persons, it's a bit of some choreography. People are invited to go to a particular room and present their views, and their views are expected to be consistent with the expectations of the special interest groups or the ruling class. If you give a view which is not accepted, then people start giving you names. And, you know, we are now living in an era where there's so many fallacies, where we are being told that BBI is going to be the solution to the problems that have been in the Kenyan political space for donkey years. Now, Mark has indicated that...
So you're saying, as you continue, that the BBI process is choreographed and controlled by certain places or people, and it is trying to correct a document that was people-driven.
Absolutely. BBI is nothing more than a a special purpose vehicle aimed to deliver results that serve the interests of the ruling class and special interest groups. For instance, let's go at the fundamentals. There are predictably clockwork accuracy. Almost every 5 years when you're having an election, there's going to be tribal clashes. What causes these tribal clashes? It's not as if the various persons in Kenya are not united. It's the political leaders who are not united. So when IBC doesn't serve their selfish interest, then we've got this chaos. Now, we've said times above number. You do not need BBI to clean up IEBC. You just need simple amendments to the relevant provisions, ensuring that you get the good people to run IBC, and ensure that when you have commissioners or senior managers or senior officers who commit errors of both omission and commission, they pay the penalty for it. But for every single election we've had, the people responsible with managing that electoral process, when they commit errors, deliberate or otherwise, nobody has ever suffered a pecuniary penalty. Nobody has suffered any criminal penalty. Actually, after every election, the managers break into a dance and song. You do not need BBI for this. Now, when we say that BBI is going to give us an all-inclusive government, an all-inclusive public sector, we already have Chapter 6 of our Constitution. We already have Article 10 of the Constitution. You do not need BBI to tell the persons who are running the show, the president, his deputy, or cabinet ministers, that when you're making public appointments, it needs the face of Kenya. You do not need an act of parliament to tell appointing authorities that when you are making key appointments, maybe in defense, in intelligence, the attorney general, that members do not need to come from the same community. You do not need BBI for that. You do not need BBI to have very solid economic management so that you have a solid fiscal strategy, a solid monetary strategy for Kenya. You do not need BBI to stop this accumulation of public debt. It's very basic. And we go back to the time of President Kibaki. President Kibaki, with the old constitution, he ran Kenya very well. And people were surprised that, in fact, we can do very well with this constitution. Okay. So in my view, it's not about the structure of power. No, it's about the people who are running the nation and the decisions they take. And unfortunately, nobody suffers from the erroneous decisions they take. So these are fallacy which is being created that BBI is going to be the magic bullet, is going to be the solution, is going to be the messiah to our situation. Is a fallacy. We can have another 20 BBIs, but if the people entrusted with delivering the BBI, the structure of power, if they do not respect Mura and Wanjiko, will be still in the same mess. Ask yourself, when President Kibaki took office, how come we had a lot of peace, a lot of tranquility? You remember that the time people went to KCC and were taking a shower in those fountains. You remember is the time Mura and Wanjiro were arresting policemen.
To be fair, there was post-election violence in 2007 when Kibaki was sworn into office.
Yeah, now that goes to the germane issue. It's about the election, because you remember it was a disputed election. That when IBC pronounced the winner, we don't know who won. So you do not need this BBI to clean up IEBC. It's very, very basic. And I think the people who are creating this narrative of BBI, they are creating that narrative that is going to be between the dynasties and the hustlers, because there's a bit of intellectual laziness. While in fact, the ruling class, whether they are part of the dynasties, whether they are part of the hustlers, all of them are enjoying some sort of an incestuous relationship. And this thing has got nothing to do with Mura or Wanjiko.
Mark, what do you say to Dismas's thoughts? Because you said, you talked about the things that need to be corrected, including electoral violence after every 5 years. Talked about 2017 disputed election, the 2007 post-election violence, 1997 and 1992. But do you need BBI? Do you need to change the constitution to address what ails the electoral process?
Ben, BBI is not a simple referendum about whether to have prime minister or not. And we need to understand one thing, that societies advance by conversation. Those conversations being held by BBI are what this country needs to move forward. There is no other way to do it. You cannot say that the country has not done ABCD. then say that the people in power need to do something about it. Then when they are doing something about it, decide that what they're doing is wrong. In fact, let's take it a bit further. When you say that people are invited to a meeting and they go to a hall and give their suggestions, how else do people give views? Let's not just try to paint everything with broad brushes and try to make everything look bad. The truth of the matter is this, that it is not Raila and Uhuru in 2017 who are fist fighting in the streets. It is the people of Kenya. It is you and I. And you and I express our support for these leaders, and that is why in 1992, when some of us were not happy, tulidungana mishale. So let's not pretend that it is just an IEBC matter. IEBC was not there when people were burnt in a church in Eldoret. So when we try to say that the efforts being made will not work, and we assume that the same people trying to make an effort should then also be trusted to make another effort that we've imagined, does not make sense. Let's be honest. Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga have identified the very same issues Dismas is talking about. The BBI report has identified solutions for each of those problems. So tell me, what is so bad with implementing solutions to the same problems you've said? Why do we have this thing that we don't need it, yet we say we have problems, and the thing actually elucidates solutions? So unless you're telling me that having a cap on how much money we should borrow as a country is a bad idea, let's debate that. Tell me that the BBI has solutions that are impractical. Let's debate that. But don't just take a broad brush, paint the whole thing bad without going to the meat of it. Tell me what is so evil inherently of even having a prime minister. What will happen? Will we wake up tomorrow and the sky will not be blue? We need to interrogate these things with veracity, with a fine-tooth comb, to see what is actually in the report, and not just have this generalized feeling that things are bad when the document is actually not bad. Because what is wrong with getting 3 years tax hiatus as a business? I run a business. I need that right now during COVID. So why would I argue against that?
You know, Ben, it's very clear that when you're running an election, the election must be free, fair, and reflect the will of the voters. That when you vote, your vote must count. And that's what we are supposed to be achieving during every 5 years when we're having an election from 1963. So we know the solution, that if you want to make sure that you have a peace every 5 years, make sure the election is free, fair, predictable, that the people's goodwill is manifested in the scorecard. Now, when the people's goodwill is not manifested in the scorecard, the key political players lose their cool and they tell their supporters to go to the streets. Now, if you are able to have a free, fair, predictable election, then the person who is declared winner knows that he has won. The person who is declared a loser knows that he has lost or she has lost. There will be no room for violence. There's a reference to a church which was burnt in Kiamba in Rift Valley. That was a byproduct of an election that people said was probably not free, fair, nor credible. So to address that issue, just clean up IEBC. And IEBC must be cleaned up. IEBC does not need BBI to be cleaned up. The other issue about tribalism and inclusivity in Kenya, you don't need BBI to tell governors that when they're making appointments with their county governments, a certain percentage has to come from outside that county. You do not need BBI to tell the President of the Republic of Kenya that his cabinet and top public servants must reflect the face of Kenya. We already have the solutions inherent in the current constitution.
All right, you made those points. Remember, we are still waiting for the final BBI reports to be presented again to the president for Kenyans to know the contents of that. Hezbon, have the final say on this. Does the current political climate, showcase or understand where this country has come from independence to the second liberation and the third liberation, which was the 2010 constitution? And is Kenya a freer or going to be a freer and just society given the current political situation which we're in, big on it being the BBI process?
Well, I think there is reason to be optimistic, given that looking at what has happened in the recent past, we've had like 3 key milestones. One was the move from a one-party state to a multi-party kind of system of governance in 1992, when we had our first multi-party election. Then we had a transition, from KANU and specifically President Moi to, the NAC government by President Kibaki. So that was another milestone. And then the third milestone, which was a lot more critical, was in 2010 when we had the Constitution of Kenya 2010. But in all these 3 milestones, you realize that nothing much has changed. When Dismas talks about it is in the structure of the leadership, and all he can talk about is the face of Kenya. I think we've had the face of Kenya even during the one-party state de jure. When President Moi used to have the face of Kenya in his cabinet, in KANU as a political party. But why are we still having this conversation? Because it has always been very cosmetic and, of course, top-down. It has not helped Kenyans. Now, when we look at the Constitution of Kenya 2010, again, the conversations were not people-driven. We had these delegates, civil society interest groups as delegates who had this conversation about the new constitution, including what preceded the 1997 general election, the IPPG. Now, if you compare that and the BBI process, and just like Mark has aptly put it, the BBI is a conversation, and I don't think people should complain. People should just engage in that conversation and put in what they think will take this country forward. Critical for me is the fact that if the leadership has been the problem, then the solution can only come if the leadership realize that there is a problem. And that is what we saw in President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. They realized that there is a problem. They came up with the 9-point agenda items, and then they took it back to the people, and the people have had a conversation. So from where I sit, this is a conversation. It has been a lot more consultative than any other thing that we've had in this country. And it ushers in a platform that is a lot more robust in terms of who wants to chip in into this conversation and say this is wrong and this is right. And ultimately, it is also important to note that it's not everything in the 9-point agenda item that requires changing of the law. But there are things that if we have to change, then we can only enforce them through the law. And those are the ones that will require the change of the law and possibly a referendum. So we cannot keep making noise about IEBC from 1992, and here we are in 2020. We just got to do something, and that is what the BBI is doing. And if Dismas and every other divergent voices have, outside there have against the BBI, have anything, the BBI is a conversation like Mark has put it. Put in your voice in this conversation. Follow up your voice. It will come back to a vote if we are going to have fundamental changes in our constitution.
All right, let's leave it there. You maybe come to comment on it later on because of time. But as you're watching us from home, be sure to give us your thoughts on that. What do you think about the current political situation as Kenya marks 30 years of Saba Saba? Is this where is this where you wanted us to be? Be sure to tell us what you think. Let's take another quick commercial break here on Inside Politics. When we come back, we shall be switching gears from matters politics and talking about the COVID-19 global pandemic. The president lifting measures, pandemic curbing measures, easing measures, but with a disclaimer saying should the situation worsen, then we shall be back to lockdown. This even as cases of COVID-19 continue to surge, not only in Kenya, but across the globe. Stay with us.
Niseme mwenyewe, maana mimi nikiwa chairman wa Kenya African National Union, mimi ni mwenyekiti na nina kura yangu moja. Nikasema basi yule ambaye mimi naona anaweza kwenda pamoja na vijana wale wengine ambao wana vice chairman, wana nani, ni kijana anayeitwa Uhuru Kenyatta. huyu ni mrefu. Watu wanasema ati, mnaambiwa ati mtoto. Mtu aliye na bibi yake na mambo yake yote. Kama mtoto yake anasoma katika shule kadhalika, jioni akirudi anasema baba ni mtoto, ni kijana ameshakuwa mzee wa mji wake. Azingasema yeye. Kuna viti vile vingine au wengine wataingiliana pamoja na kwenda kusukuma mbele. Piwa tu baba. Yeye hapana mtu, yeye hapana, mnasikia piwa tanaogopa huko kila mahali. Yeye mwanaume. Lakini mimi napima tarubini. Mimi simetele kusema kwa sababu ni Mkalenjin, yeye anaweza, ama mwingine, ama Mutuvadi, ama nani. Mnasikia hiyo?